thank you all for your interest on fiscal developments in the world right now. The global economy is going through turbulent times. The pandemic, inflation, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and growing debt vulnerabilities are forcing policymakers to face painful trade-offs. After the unprecedented expansion in 2020, monetary and fiscal policies continue to move together, pivoting towards simultaneous tightening in 2022. Economic recovery and winding of pandemic-related measures and inflation surprises resulted in debt and deficits falling in 2021 and 2022, but they remain well above their pandemic levels and projections, their pre-pandemic levels and projections, pardon me. These forces will wane in the future. Most of the unwinding has already taken place, with deficits falling from 9.7% of GDP in 2020 to 4.7% of GDP in 2022. Inflation surprises help initially, but this effect cannot endure. Once inflation becomes broad-based and persistent, inflation expectations catch up. High and volatile inflation makes credit more expensive and its costs less predictable. In the context of high inflation, high debt, rising interest rates, and elevated uncertainty, consistency between monetary and fiscal policy is paramount for economic and financial stability. In most countries, this means staying the budget on its tightening course. Prioritizing macroeconomic and financial stability is especially relevant as recent developments in bond markets show increased market sensitivity to deteriorating or weak fundamentals. That raises the specter of more frequent and widespread fiscal crises. High inflation, together with high and surging energy prices and food prices, combine into a very politically salient cost of living crisis. In the Fiscal Monitor, we present a survey of 174 countries and the measures taken in the first half of the year. We list about 750 measures. When we look at the country composition of the measures taken, we do see that actions motivated by the energy surge are dominating for advanced economies, but food is relatively much more relevant for developing economies. And that reflects the well-known fact that food is a much larger share of the budget in countries that have lower GDP per capita. Now, the most common measures aim at dulling price pass-through and include reductions in consumption taxes, custom duties, and energy subsidies. Some of these measures have been necessary to face the urgency of the crisis, but most have not been targeted enough, which we find unfortunate. In a world in which available energy resources have shrunk, attempting to maintain domestic demand at levels seen prior to the energy crisis is not economically viable. Such policy stance does not provide the right incentives to reduce energy demand and expand supply. Moreover, it ends up reducing the energy resources available to countries that cannot afford those measures, a point that is very much emphasized in the fiscal monitor. The price mechanism is effective in allocating scarce energy resources and in providing incentives to find alternative sources of supply. Targeted measures or expanding existing social safety nets can help reconcile the imperative of support for the most vulnerable with the recommended policy mix. The rise of extreme poverty and food insecurity that began before the pandemic is very concerning. Emergency support is necessary. The food crisis should be addressed at a global level by a broad set of initiatives, including lifting restrictions on food and fertilizer exports. Some emergency financing will be available through the new food shock window under the IMF's Emergency Financing Toolkit. But more is needed, including through rechanneling of wealthier countries' allocation of the IMF's special drawing rights to poorer countries. At the national level, countries must prioritize food security. In many cases, binding financing constraints make the trade-offs very painful for countries. Coordinated global action is thus urgent. Coordinated global action is also urgent for climate transition. If we want to avert a catastrophic outcome, the time to act is now. We look forward to countries coming together to close the ambition and implementation gaps in COP27. The managing director, in her curtain-raiser speech last week, spoke about a fragile and shock-prone world. The fiscal monitor takes a deep dive into how fiscal policy can contribute to a resilient society that is capable of bouncing back in the face of adversity. The pandemic has shown that fiscal measures can be swift and impactful in protecting people and firms when times are tough. Governments have used novel and innovative tools, often leveraging digital technology. These measures can be more efficient if building on a sound pre-existing social protection system when crises strike. The fiscal monitor message is clear. Be prepared. Be prepared for a shock-prone world. It recommends a fair and broad-based tax system, a comprehensive and scalable social protection system, and last but not least, building fiscal buffers and a return to fiscal rules. Thank you very much for your attention.